Hi, thank you. We should start, and we're pretty much on time. That's great. Welcome back to this session. I'm Gayatri Kandarai. I work with the Association for Progressive Communications. We will be, for the next 1 hour, this is rather a short session, and we'll be trying to look at this question of the whole truth, bringing economic, social, and cultural rights back into perspective when we're discussing about ICT and its impact on people. I'm going to keep this very brief, and we're going to have very brief interventions from a really great panel we have here. Just to set the tone for this discussion, economic, social, and cultural rights do not oftentimes get the same attention that civil and political rights get. Even the discourse on them is not necessarily as evolved as the discourse and the evolution of the civil and political rights. But the fact remains that economic, social, and cultural rights oftentimes have a deeper impact on our lives and our ability to live to the best of our abilities, really. So what we thought is, of course, we will not be able to discuss all economic, social, and cultural rights. So we can take questions from you, or we can look at rights that you point out as well. But the panel will look at some specific topics. I would like to introduce the panel at this point. We have Sunil Abraham, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Internet and Society. And we have Shong Fong, who's the Program Specialist from UNESCO. We have Osama Manzar, who's the Director and Founder of Digital Empowerment Foundation, and Chat Garcia, who's the Executive Director of the Association for Progressive Communications. Just to preface this entire discussion, we have this publication called the Global Information Society, which looks at economic, social, and cultural rights on the internet. It has 47 country reports from across the globe and 10 thematic reports, which are quite revealing about the impact that the internet has had on economic, social, cultural rights, and the impact economic, social, and cultural rights has had on the internet. The preface for all this is, of course, the fact that internet itself is, in a way, an exercise of an economic, social, and cultural right, which is access to technology and scientific development. So with that as the setting stage, we'll go first to Sunil, who will be discussing the impact of copyright and more broadly intellectual property regimes on economic, social, and cultural rights.
Thanks for having me, Gayatri. And before I get started, it's always good to know who are the stakeholders at a multi-stakeholder meeting. So my question is, all of us produce intellectual property. If we are sitting in a restaurant and we scribble a poem on a piece of napkin, that is protected by copyright law, as long as we publish it, that means we give it to somebody else. But when it comes to the rents from intellectual property, who in this room earns more rent from the intellectual property that they own than they pay? That means all of us pay for software, all of us pay for books, for movies, for music, for our TV subscription. But who in this room has so much intellectual property that the amount you're earning from your intellectual property is more than the amount you're paying for intellectual property? Is there anybody like that? Please raise your hand. Okay, so all of you are the exploited lot in the intellectual property regime. You are the rent payers, and the people that you pay rent to, they're not in this room. Those stakeholders don't come to the IGF anymore because the IGF is no longer interested in IP enforcement. So therefore, I think they've stopped. Oh, they come. They still come? At least they're not in this room. Yeah. Do you earn more intellectual property than you earn more from the intellectual property that you own than you pay? Okay, thank you. So now we move on. Because of the way the intellectual property regime has been configured, many alternatives have risen. The first and most important alternative that rose more than 30 years ago is the free software movement, which turns the concept of intellectual property on its head. And those of us who use the internet know that free software is the foundational basis of the internet as we know it today. And we also have more radical proposals. A across the world, in different countries, pirate parties have come to power. And some of the pirate parties in their election manifestos say they want to shrink copyright term from 60 years to 5 years. And there are lots of radical proposals like that being made today. So how do intellectual property and the alternatives, such as free software, impact our economic, cultural, and social rights? That's the economic, social, and cultural rights. I should get the order right. So the first way it impacts us is Article number 1, and that is the right to self-determination. So if you want to be truly sovereign on your device, whether it's your mobile phone or your laptop, if you want to be absolutely sure that nobody else is playing around with your data, then you have to use free software today. Suppose you are from Bhutan, and I'm telling you a story from some time ago, and Microsoft has decided not to support your language in its operating system. Then the only way you can exert cultural sovereignty is by using free software and customizing it, making derivative work. You protect your cultural sovereignty through free software. If you're a disabled person, and in India, if you were disabled and you wanted to use technology, you'd have to buy a screen reader. The proprietary screen reader cost $1,000 per license and supported only 2 languages, and only one of that was an Indian language. So the community of visually impaired persons in India, and we played a small part in that, came together, modified an existing free software application, made it speak 12 Indic languages. So the right to self-determination very clearly protected by the alternatives that have emerged to the dominant IP regime. The second manner in which it affects us, the right to education. Article 13 in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And this is the right to education. If, as a nation state, you don't give choice or you don't allow young people to study free software in universities and colleges, then really as a nation state, all you are is a salesperson for a proprietary software company, and you're building a lifelong habit which these students will never be able to kick because they are only comfortable using proprietary software. So they will remain rent payers for the rest of their lives. The next important implication is Article 6, the right to work. Mobility in the labor market. Increasingly, if you join certain corporations, you'll be taught only one technology, and you have no exposure to other technologies. You are signed into NDAs and confidentiality agreements. You cannot tell the world what you've achieved. But if you join a firm that is based on free software, a lot of your contributions will be available on public repositories, and your mobility in the labor market is protected. And finally, Article 15, there's a bit of a balancing act in Article 15, and I'll quickly read it. The right of everyone to take part in cultural life, to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its applications, and the protection of authors for moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, artistic, or literary production. So on the one hand, what this article is trying to do is ensure that there are incentives for creators and innovators. On the other hand, it is also trying to ensure that the fruits of such creativity and innovation are broadly available to society. And while the article doesn't make it absolutely clear that you must have an IP regime and that you must enforce it, or that's the only way to protect moral and material interests, that could be, of course, one way to do it. What it makes very clear for us is while you keep that part of the bargain, you should also ensure that everyone has the right to partake in cultural life and the benefits of scientific progress. So this is only possible if there are a wide set of exceptions and limitations, fair dealing exceptions or fair use exceptions in your IP regime, and that the state adequately promotes the alternative to the dominant IP paradigm, which is free software. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I was just about to pass you the 2 minutes. So that's perfect. Sunil wrote a chapter on in this report about traditional knowledge and the protection of traditional knowledge. Yeah, and the co-author with Sunil Vidush is also here. So if you have any questions on that, I'm sure both of them would be happy to take it once we are through with the speakers. So from there, Osama, we'll move on to you. Sunil has already kind of touched upon the point about mobility within the workforce, right? But you wrote a very interesting article yesterday for Livement on the future of jobs, even if the internet is here and it's playing its full hand, right? So it would be great to hear from you on what you feel about that.
Okay, so one is that I don't know if I'm the right person to talk, but since the word says culture, social, and talks about about the society, I have few comments to make. Before I comment on the article that you said, there are a few thoughts that I had, and I thought that may be interesting to share. There is an observation that most of the countries and most of the places, languages have been dying. And most of those languages are dying, which are actually spoken in oral, and they don't have a script. Gradually that is what we see. And technological evolution, I would say, is one of the reason I would say that most of the languages have been dying, because if writing is also, pen and paper is a technology, then most of the languages which didn't have a script to read and write started dying. And from that perspective, what technology is coming up is quite helpful, that most of the oral languages is now there to capture the oral tradition, and therefore it is very, very important that we look at technology as becoming very, very instrumental, viable means to protect those oral languages and all that. The second example, I was meeting this person in the deserts of Rajasthan. This person remembered 450 songs, and he doesn't know how to read and write. 450, even your hard disk will not take that much in a mobile to have 450 songs. He literally remembered, has been singing and folk musician, and we thought that gradually, if you start writing, since he doesn't know how to read and write, the only way you can perhaps protect, if at all, I mean, I'm not talking about copyright law perspective, but typically just to grab those knowledge and that information, that oral, is the only medium that technology is now, which is oral. Earlier, it was not even possible, because if you don't know how to read and write, you don't know. It has been oral tradition that has been coming. The third thing is about what you are talking with. Gradually, technological evolution is making us to understand how we are going into the future to protect the culture, the language, the tradition, the socio-economic formulas, and also go with the technology. But we don't have a mechanism or a proper curriculum system to prepare us for the future. We don't even know the future. All the people who work in villages, we work in about 350 villages, all the people who work there, they don't know how to process an information. They have never been taught. We don't know how to process the information. All the information today that we process require gadgets, require technology, requires some kind of high-tech thing to process, and we don't know how to. And even to retrieve the information, you have so many barriers. So, I would just like to say that how do we tackle this situation of handling information now and in the future, and how we are creating jobs around it, is a big question that we need to know. Do we have a proper curriculum system? How do we process the information? Can we create a job around how do we process the information? How do we process the knowledge? Can we create, among the university, we're still studying engineering and medical and physics and chemistries and all that. Our practices have been changing, our subjects have not been changing. Our culture of practicing of all the old system is not changing. So how do we tackle this information, this entire burden of how do we tackle information? Tackle information in the sense that it is becoming, the knowledge is becoming data. How do you know how to process a data? A normal person in the school and in the colleges, we are never taught how to process a data, how to feed a data, how to read a data, how to decipher a data. So I would say that the whole cultural issue has been changing. It's no more an issue that what do we eat and what do we drink as a part of the culture and what do we wear, but the whole culture of how do we process the information. And is there a system that we know how to tackle the information is the question that we need to ask.
Thanks, Osama. Just to add to your issues that we also talked about yesterday is the application of labor law protection to online spaces. No? The fact that labor law protections have become extremely eroded, given that people are now moving more to online spaces to work, and the protections they might have had, even a minimal protection in offline spaces, is now pretty much becoming invisible for them. So that's also a very interesting and worrying trend to look at. Kat, we move from there to you. To get more like a broad picture, no, in terms of what civil society has been trying to do with economic, social, and cultural rights, more specifically your experience with it. But also, do you feel like there's not enough attention that's being given to economic, social, cultural rights, and why?
Thanks, Gaya. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll answer that in relation to our work around internet and policy making, or frameworks around the internet. And I would say this is precisely why in 2014 we decided in APC to look at economic, social, and cultural rights, and to look more deeply into it and do research around it in terms of framing internet and development, human rights and development. For the longest time, a lot of attention, as Raya was saying, was around civil and political rights, right to privacy, freedom of expression, etc. And a lot of this is also driven by issues that there's a sort of a divide in relation to what is happening in developing countries and in developed countries. So these issues around freedom of expression seems to be much more felt at that time, in the north, and not necessarily in developing countries. But of course, now that's changing as well. So I think that was the sort of a natural progression in terms of looking at civil and political rights. But then, if you remember, those of you who have been in this field for a long time, there was all the discussion around ICT and development, way back in 2005, etc. That was the discourse around ICT for development. But a lot of that is really using ICT for looking at access, looking at ICT as tools, getting young people, getting women on board in relation to using the technology, but not really from a very holistic development and human rights perspective. So I think this is where the work around economic, social, and cultural rights come from. There was a gap. We saw a gap there. And a lot of these I think the gaps are in different ways, in different, expressed in a conceptual gap, because there really are two conventions, one on civil and political rights, and the other one is economic, cultural, and social rights. And sort of there's a divide there. APC has been working around, for example, our experience has shown us that if you engage the Human Rights Council, for example, around civil and political rights, freedom of expression is an example, you do get more traction. And we saw that in 2012, when the HRC started to then say, okay, freedom of expression online is an important issue. And now you have every year a resolution coming from the Human Rights Council on especially this issue. But when you go to the other side of it, the committee that looks at economic, cultural, and social rights, there's very little discussion around the internet and how does this impact, how does the development of the internet impact on our rights. So this is really where we're going in terms of looking at, let's say, the right to work, and how, as you're saying now, how is labor changing? What are how does it impact on our rights, on our organizing, on unionizing? If there is now the gig economy and it's changing the labor patterns, that's something that we can look into. So there was a discussion yesterday, and also I think it was mentioned this morning in plenary, that artificial intelligence and what that means for, in relation to rights. No? So all of this, I think, if we look at it from a perspective around more of our collective rights, that's where we need to have much more research. And I think we need to engage more organizations who actually have been working in this on economic, social, cultural rights for a long time. I mean, indigenous people's organizations have been, they've managed to set up indigenous a permanent commission on indigenous peoples, and they are interested in these issues. but we need to engage their issues so that so that they're then looking at make connecting with them, networking with them, so they can then be part of a discussion around the internet. I think they'll bring a lot of those their discussions will enrich our discussion. In the same way that the issues around disabilities and accessibility enriches the discussion here, and that's actually also part of the LCI. Here in this forum, I don't think we have anyone. I haven't seen anyone, and maybe there is, but I just from the indigenous people's groups, for example. This is like a gap here that we're seeing. I think that is quite an important point. So conceptual gap, who are the people who need to do we engage with, who are the organizations, and also the international platforms or processes that we need to then reach out to.
Thank you, Chad. Just picking up from that point of the processes that we need to engage with, we have the sort of a mix of what platforms to use, what institutions to work with. But one particular institution that can definitely lead this or help organizations work with them to do this is UNESCO, right? So what would be really interesting to hear is what UNESCO or how UNESCO views this intersection, but also briefly what UNESCO has been doing and prioritizing.
Thank you so much, Katie, and also again APC for inviting UNESCO and also for organizing such an important session. As Colissa said already, that since this broader social, economic, and human rights are not so much highlighted in internet-related conferences and discussions. I think it's really a high time to reflect on this. As in this morning, the moderator of the opening has raised a very valid question to think about the broader social implication of internet as an entirety. I mean, in the past 50 years, we have seen the internet changing, but now it seems just the beginning of the change because the technology is really growing so fast and much more fast than before to shaping the human society. I mean, itself, this internet is an industry, but it's also, restructuring the traditional economy, traditional banks, and the transportation, and everything, it's internetized. And we are not ready, actually. Even, the recent artificial intelligence, we are simply causing so much labor layoff. So in this large context, we find this subject so pertinent. As well at the UN level, not only UNESCO, but in the post-2015 process of following and implementing World Summit on Information Society, the very recent summit in Geneva in June last month, the topic is really to combine the ICT and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. In the 17 SDGs, we see the ICT and internet as a driving force, as a cost-cutting tool for every state to use to achieve all of the goals. In the previous session, one participant raised a question. I think that the information was not so much featured in the SDGs, but actually it is. I think it's really embedding every goal as a very important crucial tool written there. Particularly in the target SDG number 17, it fosters access, universal access to fundamental freedom and also public information. I think the ICT it is there. And come back to what UNESCO is doing. I also like to share our views about the broader dimension of socio-economic cultural rights and its relation with the civil and political rights. Yes, it's true that in the past 10 years we have observed that things like privacy and data protection are much more debated at a global level, at a regional level. And now it's time to take really a holistic view to combine these two domains. We are by nature interdependent. We are by nature indivisible from our point of view because you see that we are supporting each other. You just cannot imagine that any free expression and press can be protected without access, without the basic development of the economic and the social rights. And not to mention culture. Many people mention that in the internet there's a gap of language script, and the majority of the language are going to exist, not to mention in the cyberspace. And also, where are the indigenous people? How do we access? Can we benefit from the internet? It's all the big gaps. So we are developing a very useful framework and also tools to help each state to measure the universality of internet in the name of the internet universality. This framework, we are advocating for basic and fundamental norms. I mean, each state can use to measure its internet policies. The first one is for the rights-based. Of course, we have a prominent promoting free expression, privacy, those civil rights. But as you know, also we are promoting right to education. I mean, we are supporting education worldwide and using ICT for education. We are promoting cultural diversity, language diversity. We have so many conventions, declarations protecting cultural heritage, digital heritage, archives, etc. And that is the first pillar. How we integrate it, how into the right space, it should be really broader, to protect, expand all the rights, because now the internet is so central to society, it is society. And the second pillar, norm principle, we are talking about openness. Again, it also addresses the economic aspect, because we think the internet needs to be open economically as an industry. We believe that a very competitive, open industry and the market of internet will be very important to support all these rights advancement. Again, also openness also about about the technology standards, about the open source, and lastly, you can also think about the international level. That we wish that we are all global citizens. We don't want the internet to be divided into walled gardens and to be fragmented by the national initiatives. I think everyone really year the benefit from communicating with the world rather than only one country or one region. And the third pillar is about accessibility. When we talk about accessibility, it's really combined with the content, with the culture, and also with the user capacity, with the literacy, etc. Again, to connect it closer with other social economic social risks. And the fourth pillar I also like to present as maybe a way forward. I mean, combining such tremendous challenges in so broad domains of all these related rights, we believe that there is a moment to promote a very inclusive, participatory governance model. I think it's seen as mentioned multi-stakeholder model. We believe that in ethical saying that it's so important to get all stakeholders on board. Traditionally, we said, at the beginning of this previous agenda, we said that the multi-stakeholders means that governments, companies, private sector, intermediaries, technical community, academia, civil society should all be involved at this level. Now we see that that's not sufficient. We also need to have a social inclusive aspect. I mean, all the social economic status people and groups, also marginalized groups, I mean, the women and girls, and the indigenous groups, and the people with disabilities. I mean, this should also be considered when you discuss the internet policy, because it's concerning all their rights and interests. And again, at the international level, and I think the chapter has nicely put it that the discourse between North and South. And I think we can see so many global forums. We still see that the gap between the North and South in terms of discussion of the internet policy, because the global network and the developing country, I mean, should be equally active and participatory, and also deciding in terms of the global issues with the internet. So I thought here I wish to include more.
Thank you. We bang on time. That's great. It's been really good with your time. At this point, what we could do is there are a couple more questions to explore, but let's stop here and have some feedback or any pressing questions you have. It doesn't have to be pressing. Any questions you have, even more comments, or if there's any particular kind of rights that broadly falls within economic, social, and cultural rights that you think is not getting the kind of attention it does, it should. then please raise it. You don't have to necessarily go back to the mic. If you choose to sit where you are and raise a comment or question, it's fine. You just have to repeat the question. If that's the case, you will repeat the question here so for the transcriptors to capture. Yeah.
My question sort of follows on from what Kat was saying, that civil and political rights end up getting more traction than economic, social, and cultural rights. So I was thinking one of the main differences between the Covenant for Civil and Political Rights and the Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights is that the CCPR is binding on states, whereas the CESER is not binding on states. What the CESER looks for is for best efforts enforcement. It doesn't look for commitment. So what they end up essentially looking to states for is that they're committed to an effort to enforce these rights, but they don't look at the outcomes themselves. So I guess my question is it ever possible to look to states to treat cultural, economic, and social rights at the same level as civil and political rights? Is it possible to build that traction at all?
Thanks, Geeta.
It's a very hard question to answer. At the international level, to reach a treaty, it's super difficult and challenging. If that's the direction civil society pursues, everything can be possible. And when you look at the internet, it can be more tricky. Because imagine that different states have different level of development in different social contexts. They might have different needs, different priorities in their national development agenda. So I think it's an open question, really. It's really up to the multiculturalism participation. Because now even UN mechanism is also opening up, like Human Rights Commission, they're really organizing so many public hearings and consultations. In UNESCO, we're also taking civil society, and as always, we are consulting with all stakeholders. Even here at this forum, we are doing a consultation event to inform us how to develop internet indicator. And the discussion is on a Saturday lunchtime to listen to your suggestion. If you think there's a need, we should do a treaty, that can again come back to our states that we're working with our members, will come back that it seems that there's a support that's needed to consider this possibility. Then I think maybe things can move.
So that'll be tomorrow at lunch, right? So please read that. We have a person in the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Bhaskar Bhattacharjee. I'm a person with visual disability from Bangladesh. Especially, I would like to ask a question to Osama. Osama, I think I know you very well because of the Monton Award. My organization has received at least 2 Monton Awards. Thank you. So my observation, the copyright law of our region is the biggest barrier for a person with visual disability to access content and books. We found at least only very less number of the books are accessible because of the copyright law. The organization who are making accessible books, they are not able to make the books in accessible format. And there is a international treaty already adopted by the WIPO that called Marrakesh Treaty, by which if country ratify the Marrakesh Treaty, then it would be easier to exchange the accessible books. Like if there is any accessible books in India, we can easily take it in Bangladesh. And also through Marrakesh Treaty, we need to review our copyright law, and there should be a copyright exception in our copyright law. Then any books can be made available in accessible format. So I believe these types of discussion can ensure the all rights of people with disabilities and ensure SDG Article 4 implementation And lastly, I would like to say, when I was a student in college, university, and school, I didn't get a single book in accessible format. Today, it is a digital world. We cannot accept it. Thank you.
So actually, that was a good comment, not a question, I guess. So I didn't see, but two things I want to highlight, and one I would pass on to Sunil to reply in terms of copyright issues, in terms of how we can have maximum access in an oral manner so that all kind of people can access of the content that is not available copyright-wise. But secondly, I would like to highlight is that digital medium also allows you to create new content, and that can be openly made and made it available. So we don't have to really dependent on written medium to be transformed, but also every person can create new content, and the new content can be spread. So open content also has become quite a culture, which can be seen as a repository of access. But I would also like to know personally in terms of how do we get access to millions of repositories, which is coming from written to oral, and how come we can suffer the barrier because of the copyright issue or many other issues.
Thanks, Susama, and also thanks to the gentleman who asked the question. I think it's time for us to be very aggressive when it comes to the ask at the national level. I don't think we should settle for the standard that has been established in the Marrakesh Treaty. The Marrakesh Treaty is both work-specific and disability-specific. It is work-specific in the sense that it only applies to books, and it is disability-specific because it only applies to the print impaired or the visually impaired. In India, the exception that was introduced into our Copyright Act before the Marrakesh Treaty was both works neutral and disability neutral. So it didn't matter what type of disability you had, and it didn't matter what the form of the copyrighted work was. You still had the right to make an accessible version of the work, use it yourself without paying royalty, and also share it with others without paying royalty. Osama, of course, the question that you asked about how to ensure this greater flow and exchange of these repositories is, the gentleman already answered that, which is the ratification of the treaty is the key piece there. But there's also other emerging challenges. So even if we get good copyright law with the appropriate exceptions, at the W3C, they're working on certain standards like the EME, it's a DRM standard. And this DRM standard is supposed to protect the rights of rights holders, but what it actually does in reality is prevent the disabled from accessing content again. So it isn't as if the disabled have their life easy at all, and it shouldn't be something that we leave just to the disabled, because all of us are only temporarily able. We have to have a double fortune. We have to die early and quickly. So you have to leave the APrIGF, and when you're crossing the road, a bus should come and run over you, and then when you die, you will escape disability. But if you're not in that 5% of lucky people that escape disability and die without experiencing disability, you will be disabled for some period of your lifetime. And therefore, if you don't show empathy for their cause, and if you don't support their cause wholeheartedly today, you will regret it on your deathbed.
Okay, so let's move on to the other cross-cutting issue that I kind of wanted to also place on the table, right? There are many experts here who work on gender rights and the impact on gender, especially when it comes to ICTs. Is there any reflection in the room about how the economic, social, and cultural rights of women and gender groups are impacted as a result of ICT? Would you like to start the discussion?
I think when we say cultural, it's not just about language. It's not about. It's really about how people organize and identify themselves. So I do think that, for example, groups like the LGBT community who also important in relation to how they practice sexuality, etc. And that we could look at in not only in relation to civil and political rights, but also in cultural rights. I think for women as well, I mean, all the issues around discrimination, we can look at also in relation to, and as well as discrimination in terms of access, for example, because they're supposed to have roles that are, there are a lot more barriers. And a lot of the things that have come up, APC did, at the last IGF, the Best Practice Forum looked at barriers for women and girls in terms of access to the internet. And really, a lot of the barriers have to do, aside from affordability, etc., is around traditional roles, around discrimination, etc. So I think in that sense, I mean, that those are impacted by economic and social rights, social.
Another right is also the right to health. No? The fact that the internet empowers women to have access to sexual and reproductive health information that's otherwise not traditionally available to them. And UNESCO also does quite a bit of work across gender, right?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Peter, for also raising this crucial aspect. While UNESCO is an organization promoting gender equality as a global priority for ages, and it would be really misleading to ever layer of discussion about the internet literally. And very recently, just in June, we had organized consultation on protecting journalists. And interestingly, one major recommendation is really to protect women journalists and women whistleblowers, because in the digital environment, it seems that women actors are more vulnerable and under more attack. They are facing more risk, both as a woman and as a journalist. And that's why we're working further to do more research and to put more effort to really protect the women in digital age and and also, secondly, I think that if you look at broadly the challenges of the internet, because women and girls, we are social groups which are majority, when you talk about digital divide, you cannot ignore the gender divide. And it continues to exist so prominently now, the connecting next billions, and the majority of them, they are women and girls. So that's such evidence that change is not for people to ignore when you discuss the internet security issues. And lastly, I also think that we should also go beyond the women and girls issues when you talk about gender. This now is about the gender equality. When you think about the LGBT things and new gender, some new gender aspects. So more and more, I think there's new things for the gender free. Maybe there's some new term, new culture to also promote this internet experience.
Are there any other questions from the? Yeah? We'll try to be really loud or what?
Thank you. My name is Luis from Malaysia. My question is, I think one of the reasons perhaps ESCR is not so widely discussed, at least in the ASEAN perspective, is that maybe because we do not have sufficient protection for the civil and political rights to start with, and a lot of dissidents against the government has been put to jail, and also they have no right to information about what the government is doing. So maybe that's in my understanding, maybe one reason why NGOs are not fighting for economic and social cultural rights, because the basic rights of expression and information is not even guaranteed yet. So my question is, are we in the ASEAN nation, should we be focusing on our resources, sharing our resources to fighting for ESCR, or should we start with political rights, or is it that it is complementary, that if we do economic, social, cultural rights, people's tummies are filled, they are more they are stronger in fighting for their freedom of expression and assembly. Thank you.
That's actually a really pertinent question. No? Kathy, would you like to take that one?
I think think you answered your question to some extent, right? I think it's the third point. I think what we're saying here is that you can't really say we want to do one over the other because all of these issues happen at the same time. And as I see, a lot of other people have said already in different forums here that one impacts on the other. So, for example, you talk about right to information, but then if you don't have access, I mean that is a prerequisite to the right to information, to digital information. So again, that's important. I think that the whole point is around how you frame it, and what is useful, what has been useful, is to frame it from a rights-based perspective. This is a right that we don't look at it as a market-driven, for example. We're talking about women and the drive to connect with the 200 million women who are not connected to the internet, who don't have mobile. That's a really market-driven agenda in my view. Yes, you have phones, etc., but what does that do? Does that actually look at strengthening the rights of women in relation to their right to work, the right to, to equal pay? It doesn't really. So you'd have to look at what the access is for to some extent. So I think that's very. And I think in the ASEAN context, there are some some processes that can access, and it's hard. I think it's not easy to sort of engage some of these regional or sub-regional platforms and processes because they tend to like, I think the governments tend to stick together and not, they're very protective. ASEAN, for sure, governments are very protective of bringing in a lot of talent in relation to, for example, setting standards around rights in the sub-region. But I think these spaces we can feel are still important for us. In some regions, in my experience, we've had some success. For example, recently the African Declaration on Internet, on Human Rights on the Internet, which really has opened up a lot more space around advocacy. There's also in the Inter-American community that happened. So there are some models I think that we can look at. Can I just respond to that question of Gita earlier around, and I think I want to relate that then. I think while the ESCR may not be enforceable, we see this as a sort of a strategy really that you see in a process that you engage. And I think it's not, yes, in the end, it's a government saying and international organizations realizing it takes traction in that space, but it's also those organizations who are engaged in that space. So whether they're civil society organizations who we may not be reaching, who may not understand why they need to include in their advocacy the internet. With them, that's always been a strategy that we've had in APC. So, for example, one of the things we do is we really reach out to the women's movement. We really are a very powerful movement so that they understand that the internet is their agenda. And we've been successful, I think. It took a lot of years, but it's a strategy where you actually interact with other movements that are strong and powerful and actually have strength in terms of their advocacy. If they take up those issues, then you're sort of halfway there.
I'd like to throw a question open, but let's take one more and then. So, for instance, we have an app called the Startup India app, which is for entrepreneurs. But the app is only available in English and Hindi and no other regional language, and that information is not available offline. So, of course, a vast majority of the country does not have access to that information.
Or similarly, during demonetization, when there was a real push to use digital currency, the people who were really affected were the smaller, shopkeepers, the smaller business owners who did not know how to use the technology. And so not only did they not have access, they were forced to use a technology that actually put them at risk because they were actually transacting online. So my question really is, how do you maintain this balance? Because as much as it is important to push for, enabling these rights online, sometimes it can really, push people further back on the road to development because they don't have access or they don't have necessary information to use the technology correctly.
That's definitely for you. How to communicate the fact that you're further marginalizing people who are supposed to be helping with people.
Well, fortunately, they all are disconnected. So there is a lot of chance that we work together to bring them in. So there is, in India itself, more than 70% do not have access. We were wondering with one of the community that we work with, we have digitized 50,000 designs of handloom in one cluster itself. And every other day somebody comes to access those designs, we just don't know whether to give or not to give. And the copyright issues and the laws. And what they have done is they have gone to different kind of historical buildings. They have taken photographs. They have merged into a sari design or a stole design or something, and we have no idea how to work with. Similarly, I said that there are lots of knowledge and wisdom that lies into the local people. Especially into the Asian countries and mostly unconnected countries, the challenge is going to be more and more. And therefore, the social, cultural, linguistic, all those challenges is going to be more and more. The more we get connected, the more the data and the communication and the network and on the network that we are going to get emerged. So even I don't have an answer, but I have one very strong faith that they are going to be more and more inclusive, the more and more content going to be contributed by them. At the moment, they are more on a recipient of the content, but then they will be more contributing to the content. And therefore, we will have more diverse culture, we have more inclusion. Like, for example, in the oral, technologically enabled oral system, the entire oral community is no more going to be, illiterate. For example, it's ironical to say that everybody who put a thumb is called illiterate. But now you put your thumb to open your mobile. And you are called most hyper, technology-enabled human being. And so the technology has reached to the level of, irony of exclusion to have the most inclusive. And therefore, I see that there is a lot of opportunity that is going to come where technology is going to enable more and more people.
Thank you so much. Perhaps one other question to also think about is whether we need to keep pushing for access as a right now, rather than merely as an enabling aspect. Is that perhaps the question then, that we move from access as an enabler to a right, because it obviously seems to have a domino effect on the whole series of rights. Before I take any more questions, I kind of want to open one more round of quick comments from the panelists. Given that we've had this discussion on economic, social, and cultural rights, and look at a very specific process like the APrIGF, right? So what do you think needs to be done at the APrIGF? What could the APrIGF be doing, especially a multi-stakeholder space like the APrIGF, to put ESCRs a little bit more clearly on the agenda, right? In terms of discussion? And I also have the second question I wanted to ask you is also, is the problem that civil society is talking about ESCRs as one clumped up right? Or is it also civil society's mistake or also fault that we're not looking at those rights more specifically as a smaller group of rights? Is that perhaps an approach problem? Sunil, do you want to take it first?
Yes, so to answer your second question first, I think the clumping up strategy may not work because it's then very hard for policymakers to understand what they're saying. There are current policy windows open. So the Marrakesh Treaty is still being ratified by many countries, and there is this opportunity to ask governments to update their copyright law. And I think, unfortunately, the percentage of disabled persons at this meeting is low. There's only one or two people in this room. So it's something that we have to act much more as a community. And so it can't be just their problem. And we have to look at some low-hanging fruit. When the gentleman asked the question about do we have civil and political rights first and then have the other rights, the advantage with ESCRs is that they are less controversial. So if we go to governments and say, protect the rights of the disabled using these measures, it's an ask that we might get. So it might help us have a working relationship with government. I'm not saying we should give up confrontation when necessary, but this is a common cause area.
Yeah, thank you. It's my first time to come to the Asian Pacific version of the International Governance Forum. I'm quite impressed so far to see such a vibrant participation and very active participation in innovation. Yes, we talk about multiplicatism. We are expecting the sort of equal participation from all stakeholders. So maybe in Asian Pacific region, we are expecting to see more participation from governments and more participation from the private sector, from companies, people with community sector. But still, I think it's crucial to guarantee the super active civil society, to strengthen the civil society in any case, because yes, it's the push for treaty. We could ask we can make a law, but if you don't have a strong civil society right there, just cannot implement it. Because reinforcement cannot be in the right way. That's why I think the role of Asian Pacific Forum is very important to network the communities and also to strengthen the civil society here to discuss all these educational issues. And for example, the gender issues, I'd like to also come a little bit more. And I put that question because it's a logic I heard very often in this region, because I mean the discrimination against women is one of the most profound inequality of society, of human society and other society. And why I mean in the internet we should even more highlighted or equally. That's because internet, as Joe said, internet didn't automatically advance the rights without human interventions. If there's a gap of gender in civil society, they are still there on internet, even wider. That's why I said when you promote free expression, even when in environment, when the freedom is limited, when privacy is violated, you will see women and girls, they are maybe more influenced, more impacted, more vulnerable to the risks. And I heard yesterday from a person who said that there was a research saying that in Asian Pacific that women are more influenced even by the surveillance. And as we have done useful, women journalists, women whistleblowers are more risk in their life to the same work, same job, same profession. So I think it's not just a political question, it's not just much at all to discuss all these issues here in this region. I mean, the gender is a real issue. That's why we are developing indicators to measure the development of the internet from all aspects, including gender. Even in this developing region, I mean, gender should be equally considered as an indicator to show how equal the access is, how plenty the internet is benefiting everyone.
Thank you. Someone, this would also have to be our concluding remarks.
Okay, so I just want to say two sentences. One is that if you look at the whole room here, we all look similar, technologically cultured people or whatever. But what we needed in this room is technologically challenged people, but culturally diverse people to discuss this. So the next time I would suggest that we should have this kind of panel where we should have, somebody, coming inside singing a song, and somebody dancing, coming inside, and somebody having 10, 20 books written on culture and tradition and all that, and being a part of the family. And we should rather listen and, talk about rights and all those things, because ultimate the problem is that they will pose to us and to figure out that how things are going to happen. The second is that it suggests that APrIGF or all these kind of forums, we should have a dedicated session on indigenous groups having their and culturally diverse people, so that we actually not talk about them but talk with them.
Thank you so much. That's good, because everyone has actually said most of the things. No? But just to say that I think the initial question what we can do here, I think this is like a great question in terms of just understanding the concept. This is how we start. We could then continue. I think one of the just to go back to what Sunil is saying, it's not easy to understand all of this concept. I mean, we here are looking at so many things, no? But if we understand it or talk about it in words or in lived experiences, where people understand that, for example, right to work, how is it changing labor? People understand that. How is it changing my the way I travel, the way I commute, the way all of that? I think services. I think if we talk of that in this way and connect with that, I think it will make it easier. Yeah, and I just want to thank everyone. It's really great to have a lot of people interested in this topic.
Thank you to the panelists for being here, and thank you so much for all the interaction. We don't have to end this conversation, we just have to leave the room. So, if you want to continue this conversation, please do. Just a reminder, the talking test is, we only have a few left, it's at the back of the table. Please feel free to grab one. Thank you.
Thanks.
Announcement. The review synthesis document town hall at room number 202. Right now it starts at